Thanks for inviting me first. And then let me remind you one other thing. The European Union in general, they are freezing these assets in every 6 months. In order to bypass this voting system or the approval of the membership countries, they they make it unlimited, okay? So this is not something new, let me say. And let me start first with the famous quote of Atatürk, the founder of the modern Turkey, peace at home, peace at world. And secondly, let me remind one other thing. The Orthodox Patriarch in Istanbul is the first ranked among the Russian and the Ukraine church. So whatever the solution is laid down in Turkey for many reasons, and like in Istanbul gathering previously before. So there was a consensus in Istanbul, as you may remember, until UK and the European Union involved for doing the vice versa. So let me start first of all by reminding that type of, let me say, headlines. Your question, the only solution for, in my opinion, and I think for every, let me say, individual around the world, the only solution laid down in the is laid down in making the peace deal. So the short answer to stop the war and to stop the, let me say, the disputes is the only solution for every part, for every country. So European Union and United States, they are no longer supporting Ukraine. So they have some budget problems, etc. So making a peace deal like Mr. Trump proposed, I think, is the only solution. The details could be discussed, but the only solution for me, instead of freezing assets or making sanctions, etc., obviously, we can also see that it will not stop Russia, because this is a red line crossing for Russia for many reasons. So you cannot stop Russia by doing that type of things. And let me give you some also other figures. When we talk about 210 billion euros, approximately euros, let me say, frozen assets, we are talking about approximately the GDP of Portugal, Greece, let me say, Finland, Czechia, Romania, Bulgaria, and even Hungary. So we are talking a huge amount. So it is not easy to do so. As you asked me before in your question, it will create also more conflict in the futures. So the only solution for me, instead of doing that type of sanctions, etc., to try to make a peace deal among these two countries.
That's a very good point, that actually, if a peace deal happens quickly, which is what everybody wants, then it renders these conversations to some degree obsolete. And we do know, don't we, as we heard in the report, that the US now has stopped bankrolling Ukraine. How strong is the argument then that this really is the only solution to prevent European taxpayers from shouldering the burden in a more direct fashion?
First of all, let me remind you also that France has a big budget deficit problem. Together with Germany and the United Kingdom, they have huge problems on the infrastructural part, as well as in their GDP growth. But apart from that, let me remind you also some figures. For example, the military spending of Russia. The military spending of Russia is 3 times more than Ukraine. And also the GDP of Russia is still, let me say, steady together with the inflation. But they don't have any problem on the, let me say, for example, trade part. They have trade surplus still. They don't have any unemployment problems. And foreign exchange reserves, as well as their foreign exchange reserves in their central bank, is very strong still. Whether you do something else, whether you freeze all the assets or whether you put sanctions, it cannot stop Russia. Because as I tried to mention, it is a red line crossing for Russia for every reason. So they don't want to lose that war, and they don't want to stop in Ukraine case. It could be different maybe in somewhere else, but for the Ukraine, it is, I think, their red line. So for that reason, when we look at the budget problems and the other fiscal problems of European Union, they are also depending, the European Union also, they are heavily depending also the energy part. It will be more problematic for the European, let me say, citizens before the Russian citizens. So remember that European Union once it has been established as a coal union. So they are heavily depending on the energy side. So after that, they are shifted to a trade and fiscal, let me say, union against the US dollar dominance, against the United States, let me say, economy. So it won't be logical for them due to the many, let me say, issues, problems, and conflicts. In the first rank, the judicial, let me say, type of problem. So it will be a little bit compelling, and they are also assuming that Russia will lose that war. But yes, it could be. But in general, if Russia wins, that could be the most likelihood scenario. If Russia wins, there will be more conflicts in the future because of the war compensation. So that's not the only problem or issue of today. That will be also the problem of tomorrow. So to stop the war, I think, is the only solution.
It's a very interesting point you make there, because of course there will be all sorts of knock-on residual economic and political aspects that will need thought and resolution. And almost because of that, do you think this could be a dangerous move? Because once this line is crossed, if the EU does decide it can leverage central bank reserves, do you not think that sets a pretty dangerous precedent for the future, in that the EU is saying that any time it decides it wants to, it can sort of reach in and tinker with sovereign assets? If you're a country that it decides it doesn't like what you're doing at that moment.
Yeah, obviously, I think the answer is laying down in the question. I think critical question is that will you keep your assets or your fortune in such a scenario in any central bank in Europe or in any custodian services in Europe? That's the, I think, main point. So the answer is obviously yes. It could be a dangerous, let me say, situation for every investors around the world. And this is not the only case, not because of the sanctions or freezing the assets of the Russian sovereign bonds, etc., FX reserves, etc. Remember the merger of UBS and Credit Suisse. So the let me say, the two biggest European commercial banks, they merged, they belong together to these two biggest banks without any consent or without any, let me say, acceptance of their investors, or without doing any company general assembly. Just during a weekend, they did it. And apart from that, in the last month, for example, in Netherlands, we have seen that based on the Goods Availability Act, they intervene in a China chip maker company in Netherlands. So those type of, I think, let me say, examples show us that Europe is not a safe haven anymore for many reasons, and not only because we have an expansion of the risk, for example, of war, because of that type of financial, let me say, issues. And also the European assets and also the euro area is becoming much more riskier for investors to make investments for that type of, let me say, example. So, and the other thing, the frozen assets of Russia is now, in general, mostly you can see it under the Euroclear company. This is the biggest, let me say, custodian and the settlement company. And it is based in Belgium, in Brussels, which means it is also nearby of the NATO and also the European Union and the European Council. So I want to come again the first, let me say, question. Will you keep your assets in such scenario anymore from now on if you see that type of, let me say, examples of, let me say, problems?
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because what do you think this potentially does in terms of confidence? Do you think this might almost have a compounding effect on confidence, because we've already seen it, as you've already mentioned, this stagnation of growth across EU countries, partly at least due to bureaucracy, partly at least due to the way that things are being managed. If you add to that a sense of panic, almost a sense that we'll just come up with some idea, and I mean, it's an economic axiom, isn't it, that one thing that markets hate is uncertainty, a lack of predictability. Do you think there's a danger this could dramatically affect medium-term confidence in the Eurozone as a whole?
Yeah, Europe in general, they have huge problems. First of all, population. Second one, economic growth. It was inflation before, after COVID, and also trust among each other countries because of the fiscal problems among, let me say, Italy, Hungary, and with the remaining part of the European Union. And apart from that, for example, they have huge budget problems, and also after the Brexit, they have other disputes between UK and European Union. So those type of problems, and also they have to invest heavily in their infrastructures. For example, in their health system, in their education system, in their, let me say, internet system, in their, let me say, transportation. So they have to make it. Remember last year there was a report prepared by the let me say, president of European Central Bank, Mr. Draghi, the ex-prime minister of Italy. Europe needs approximately 400 billions of euro in order to make that type of those heavily, let me say, investments and needs. So obviously, the answer for your question, yes, obviously this could create a problem for, let me say, Europe and the euro area in general, because it will also decrease the confidence towards euro. Yes, today, for example, because of many reasons, because of the tariffs, etc., because of the trade wars, there is a shift from United States dollars towards, for example, euro. But in the long run, there will be a confidence problem for the euro. So, as a, let me say, reserve money. Apart from that, there are still, let me say, shifts from central banks going through the gold, for example. So instead of choosing the euro or the United States dollars or their bonds, their government bonds, the central banks are heavily investing in the last years to gold. So we can clearly see it in the World Gold Council, let me say, figures. So central banks also are getting away from that type of, let me say, reserves money and so on. So and also this weekend, the German Prime Minister also said that the Pax Americana is over. So it means that all the pacts and agreements made before are now under consideration. It means that, and also this is the end of the. This is, let me say, another saying that the neoliberalism and also the globalism now ends. So it means that a new world or a new, let me say, economic understanding is now trying to be established. So in that scenario, you should question everything, including European Union and the euro as well. Not only, let me say, Chinese renminbi or United States dollars, you should question everything. So it will be more fundamentalist and more protectionism also will come after. So we have seen that in the COVID, let me say, period. For example, the France stopped all the, let me say, aid towards Czechia, for example. So protectionism also will come among also the European countries as well. So if you see that scenario, such scenarios, so you will question everything, I think.
Professor, question everything. That's a great mantra to end on. We thank you very much indeed for your analysis, for joining us on the show. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business